Welcome to Garage Gym Athlete Cool Downs. These episodes are short, actionable podcasts pulled from previous interviews and content we've been publishing for the last several years. So go for a walk, hop on the rower, or clip into the bike for this cool down episode. Okay, and you think primarily through machine-based lifting would probably be the safest way to execute, or what do you think?
I think if you're a total novice, then maybe, because it has discrete endpoints where you can't like overextend a muscle or a joint with machines. So that's kind of nice. I think that free weights are always nice because it's going to challenge the system a little bit more. So that's always a good route too. But maybe that's once you make sure that you have sort of the motion down.
Okay. Awesome. Now, I do want to go back to that topic. You just mentioned people spraining their ankle and then their brain basically acting differently. And I think that this is, I would love to read more about it, but I think when people get an injury or something, they can start to mess up their whole body, through compensation and all these other things. So can you just talk about that concept a little bit more and maybe something people should look out for?
Yeah. So essentially, anytime that you have a joint injury, there's sort of going to be a change in neural activity that's going up to the system. And that change in neural activity at some point is going to cause a change in the way that the brain is going to operate. And so what we're starting to see with better sort of imaging technologies is that the way that people decide to move their ankle or their knee after a major injury, different regions of the brain are sort of lighting up. In people that have had ACL injury, it appears that they rely more on their visual system. So they're not getting the information from their joint anymore to say, hey, this is where my knee is in time and space. They need to physically look down to see is where my knee is in time and space. So they have a lot more information that's sort of being regulated to vision centers in the brain because that's what they need to be successful. So those are the types of examples. So if people feel like things are very different after injuries, there's a lot of evidence to suggest, that in fact is the case. And everything's a chain. So if you have an ankle injury, right, there's going to be a resultant sort of effect on the knee, which is going to move its way up to the hip, lower back, and sort of all the way up. So because it's all connected, there's sort of a direct effect through the entire chain that you need to consider.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Just that research in general, very cool. What kind of, this is like getting way into the weeds, what kind of imaging do you use to be able to see stuff like that?
Yeah, so functional magnetic resonance imaging. So basically you have people lay in an MRI scanner and you use some different types of protocols that basically can look and see where blood flow is going. So you have somebody perform some sort of activity of interest, like a knee contraction, a quad contraction, and you can see in somebody that's maybe had an ACL injury versus a healthy person that they're basically activating different parts of their brain because there's a bigger blood flow to different parts of their brain compared to somebody that hasn't.
Okay. That's really cool. Now, I want to ask, just out of curiosity, have you, in any of your research or I'd say just over your career, messed around with or experimented with blood flow restriction training at all?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I have not personally used it yet. I think it does have some pretty promising results. And actually, when we go and give talks, I sort of give like a wink in this direction. I think that, it may have some merit. The nice thing about blood flow restriction training is you can train at a much lower intensity and still get the same bang for your buck. So when we talked about eccentrics earlier, we said like 60% of your 1 rep max. Mm-hmm. Some of the blood flow restriction training suggests that you could train at like 20%.
Right.
30%. So the thinking that we have, and I have no data to directly support this, is that what if you did eccentrics with blood flow restriction training?
Yeah, better. Could you 24 hours?
Could you? I'm not sure about that. Really, but, could you optimize sort of the neural signaling that you're going to get from eccentric exercise, the direct sort of protein synthesis when you uncoil, tighten, and then also you can train at a lower intensity because you have a restriction cuff on, right?
You're right.
So you can kind of do all of those things. There are some animal models that show that people that have done the animals that have done blood flow restriction therapy with eccentric exercise under a protocol where it's supposed to cause damage, that the blood flow restriction training mitigates some of that expected damage that you would find. So perhaps it would mitigate some of the DOMs that people see. I don't think there's a lot of data on there out there yet, but I think it may have some merit.
Yeah, I think, just in our conversation talking about muscle growth and connectivity to the brain and all that, it seems like blood flow restriction training is headed in that direction from the conversations I've had about it, at least. And I think very interesting to explore. What I would like to, I guess, kind of ask you from here. So we have muscle growth, because that can happen with blood flow restriction training and eccentric movement. But what about the ligament itself? So we're kind of building up the muscle. Like, what happens to the ligament when we do all this kind of training?
Yeah. So right now, our understanding is if you tear a ligament such as the ACL, it's torn. Ligaments generally do not regenerate themselves, and maybe the biggest sort of downside to that is not only is it like a static piece of tissue that helps sort of maintain joint stability, but it's really dense with neural sort of information. And so when you put a new graft in there, you put a new piece of tissue in there, you're going to get that static stability back, but you're not going to get that sort of piece of the telephone wire that tells you like what's going on in the joint. And so there appears to be sort of long-term, maybe neural compromise because that information is simply lacking.
Okay, interesting. So the majority of the focus after the injury has to be on the muscle.
Yeah. I mean, if you've ever seen anybody recover from major injury like ACL, you will see like in their initial sort of post-operative phases, they can't even recall how to contract, fire their quadriceps muscle. So a lot of early rehab for bigger injuries is just focused on sort of helping your system to rewire itself. How do you actually contract the muscle? There seems to be a pretty big disconnect between what's going on at the joint, what your brain is trying to tell your muscle to do, and what actually happens.
Thanks for listening to today's Cool Down. If for some ridiculous reason you are not subscribed to Garage Gym Athlete programming, fix that problem right now. Go to garagegymathlete.com, sign up for a free trial, get started with us today. Thanks for listening.